Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, ciao, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you so much for helping us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Ghana, Himalaya, Podchaser, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Carrie Finison. She'll be here to celebrate Don't Hug Doug. Before we invite Carrie into the studio, we want to let you know we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read. But I Don't Want to Say Goodbye by Tashay Mason. Explaining death or a tragedy to a child is one of the toughest tasks a parent will ever face. But I Don't Want to Say Goodbye, a children's book written by Tashay Mason, is a gentle first introduction to the concepts of loss, death, and remembrance. But I Don't Want to Say Goodbye acknowledges how difficult it is to say goodbye permanently to somebody that you love. The book explores a range of possible reactions and emotions from the perspective of a little girl who has just lost her father and isn't ready to say goodbye. Her mother puts together a funeral for her father where friends and family members come together to share nice stories and celebrate his father's life. They come up with a unique idea to keep her father's memories alive in their lives. They plan to do something that his father loved to do. But I Don't Want to Say Goodbye is perfect in its simplicity and empathy. It normalizes death and grief for even the youngest readers. It covers a spectrum of emotions and lets kids know that they are not alone in how they are feeling, while also reassuring them that they can go on living even when they are sad. This is a truly special and important book, a really must-have for young children. But I Don't Want to Say Goodbye by Tashay Mason. It's our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Joining us on the line from right outside beautiful Boston, Massachusetts, we're going to be discussing I think it's a pretty important topic that's not understood by a lot of folks. Our guest is Carrie Finison, and she is the author of Don't Hug Doug. Carrie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jed. I'm glad to be here.
I'm happy that you're here, too. Don't Hug Doug. It certainly is an attention-getting title. Tell us about the book, please.
So Don't Hug Doug is about a little boy who just doesn't want to be hugged. And he says that pretty emphatically on each page. And so the goal of it is really to explore the idea that some people do like hugs, some people don't like hugs, some people are kind of in the middle, and that's all okay, and that we just need to listen to each other and ask for permission to give a hug and respect it when someone says they don't want one.
Yeah, that the idea that folks should be offended and not be respectful when someone says, "Hey, look, don't hug me." That kind of blows my mind. It's like the person doesn't want to be hugged. Chill. It is. Yeah. I mean, so when I first started the book, I didn't really start from this idea of trying to send a message or anything like that. It was really just coming from my observations of kids in my own life, in our extended family, and then my kids' friends, in classrooms and stuff like that, and just having different levels of comfort with physical affection. And I think, we can all either remember or relate to, the situation where you arrive at the extended family Thanksgiving, right? And a little child who's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 kind of hangs back and feels shy and doesn't want to kind of dole out hugs to these relatives that, they haven't seen in probably half their life, right? And so
that was kind of in my mind as I was working on it. And I think actually one of the most important lines to me in the book is close to the beginning. I think it's on the third spread. It says, "Don't worry, Doug likes you. He just doesn't like hugs." Right? Because I feel like there is this sort of feeling that people get when they want to give a hug or they want to get a hug from, an adorable child who's maybe even related to them. And the kid doesn't want to hug back. And it does feel a little bit like a rejection, So I think that was kind of what I was trying to do there, is say, this doesn't have to be a rejection. There's other ways to express a greeting or affection. You just need to kind of find what that is.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I wasn't aware of for most of my life was this idea that there are some people who hugs and touch actually, because of their sensitivities, is actually painful for them to be hugged.
Yes, that's true. And, I didn't write Doug as a child necessarily with like diagnosed, sensory issues or anything like that, because that's not my experience. And I actually wanted to leave it a little bit unknown why he doesn't want to hug, because I don't know that that's everyone's right to know, right? Mm-hmm. Or to assume. Like, you just can't assume that someone who doesn't want to hug must have autism, or they must have some kind of sensory processing disorder or something like that. You don't get to know that information just from that exchange of asking for a hug. So I hope that the book is helpful for people who do have those sort of diagnosed sensory, processing issues. But I wasn't trying to deliberately make that the reason why Doug doesn't want to hug. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, I know it varies from culture to culture. There are some cultures that are very physical, and it's, that's the requirement. You meet somebody, you give them a hug, you give them a kiss on the cheek, or, go back and forth a couple of times. I'm wondering, do you anticipate any pushback from folks from these different cultures?
That's a really interesting question. My mom's family is Italian, and so I remember going to these giant, family reunions where everyone was kissing each other and stuff like that. That definitely made me uncomfortable sometimes. I think that there is that sort of cultural aspect to it, but I also feel like we need to treat kids as individuals, right? Even if they're growing up in that culture. And there's a way to show respect, right? Or show affection to your relatives or whoever that could fit into your culture but also feel comfortable to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
this is it's a fascinating conversation because cultures are very, very different around the world, and there is a big push for everybody to fit in and conform. But there's also, we're in the year 2021 right now, and we're more sensitive to people's rights, and especially their right to choose what happens with and to their bodies.
I think that's so true. And I remember actually taking my kids to the doctor, their pediatrician, who I love. And even from the age of 2 or 3, she would ask them, before she started the physical exam, she would say, okay, is it okay if I'm going to touch your neck now? Can I do that? And they would say yes, and I just felt that approach was so respectful of them, and that when you show kids that kind of respect as they're growing up, that then they will become adults who can also show that kind of respect to each other and to the children in their lives.
Interesting. I know, as you were speaking, I know that when my kids were in middle school, they were very involved in the school's musical theater program, and the program was just starting, and they didn't have any equipment, and being the only dad who traveled around the country doing educational magic shows, I had microphones and amps and mixing boards and all that, so I volunteered to do the sound, and a lot of times we would have to mic the kids up. And I know myself, running a wireless microphone and tape the microphone here, and the body pack goes somewhere else. I know I was very careful, just for my own protection, to say to kids, hey, okay, so I have to tape your microphone here. I'm going to put a piece of tape here in your cheek. Is that okay? Is it okay if I do that? And I think for a lot of kids, I think they were kind of surprised that an adult was asking permission. It was kind of like, why are you telling me this? Just do it. But for me, there was no question about it. I just, wanted to protect myself. But it was, as you're talking about it, it was kind of a very respectful action.
Yeah, and again, I hope that I feel like as a culture, we definitely need to move in that direction, right? And so, when the first draft of this book, so as it's written now, it's written in the second person, right? So it says, you can hug a bug, you can hug a slug, you can hug a pug, but you can't hug Doug, right? It didn't start out that way at all. It started out as a more typical kind of story book in the third person. And I always would get to this sort of sticking point at the end, because I was like, well, Doug doesn't want a hug, and he says that pretty clearly, but no one is listening to him, right? These people in his life are giving him hugs anyway, because he's super adorable and like everybody wants to hug him, right? And so I put it away actually for like a year, because I couldn't figure out how to end it that would feel like Doug was like solving his problem. And then I realized that he couldn't solve the problem because it's not his problem, right? It's our problem. Our problem is we kind of don't respect children enough and each other enough to, respect someone's wishes when they say they don't want to hug, or if they look like they don't want to hug. Sometimes they don't even say it out loud, but you can tell by looking, person's body language. So that's kind of when I changed it into the second person. And there's a lot of moments in the book when, and it explicitly says, actually, the only way you can find out if someone wants a hug is to ask. And then there's these moments when the reader is actually asking other characters in the book, do you want a hug? Do you want a hug? Right? So they're kind of practicing that asking and answering piece. And then with the hope that, by practicing that in the context of the book, they can then practice that in the context of their own life, right? And maybe starting with the adult, whoever's reading the book with them, right? And that's what I would hope, is that it would kind of lead to a conversation between the child reader and the adult reader about, hey, do you like hugs? Right? Because maybe they've never even talked about it before. So.
Yeah, that is an incredibly important conversation to have. And it may be uncomfortable for some families to have that, for some caregivers, parents, aunts, uncles to have that conversation. But boy, it's a lot easier to have that conversation and to help kids understand that they do have autonomy over their bodies, and that they have that's their right, and give the kids the permission to speak up and to let people know how they feel, as opposed to down the road you don't have this conversation, and then there's misunderstandings or there's abuse and all those other, problems that could arise.
Exactly. We don't want to go down that road.
Absolutely not.
So I think starting really early to talk about this stuff openly, and, there's a whole field of, consent educators, which I didn't even know existed until after I had written the whole book and it was off to the illustrator and stuff. And I was kind of doing a little more research on it. But what they say is that if you start these conversations early, right, it's much easier to build on it later. Mm-hmm. So when you want to sit down and talk to, your 15-year-old about consent, right, you've already had that conversation way back when they were 5, mm-hmm. and maybe again when they were 7 or 8, and maybe again when they were 10. You know what I mean? So as long as you're kind of talking about it all along within a context that they can understand at whatever the age is that they are, it just makes it easier when they're older to bring up that topic again. Yeah. Right. And I'm sure they'll roll their eyes and say, "Oh, Mom," but
And that is absolutely, that is an okay reaction from your teenagers.
Right.
Because they've heard the message, and it's so important. And one thing that we say here on the podcast is that reading with your kids should be the beginning of a lifelong conversation or series of conversations. And it is so much easier to start that conversation about consent, about your autonomy over your body, and you have the right to let to decide who can and how they can touch you. That conversation is much easier to start when your child is 2 and 3 and 4 years old than it is when they're 14, 15, and 16.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of I have a 15-year-old, so it's not easy to have any conversation with a 15-year-old, right? So, yeah. 5-year-olds are easier to talk to in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's easier. We always talk about how hard it is to talk to our 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, but kind of flip the switch. It's a lot easier for a 15-year-old to have that conversation or to roll their eyes at their parents and, to say, I know that, when you've been talking about it.
Exactly.
So when they're 15, it's just reinforcing, the message that they've heard their whole lifetime. And it's like, Ma, you don't need to remind me. I know that, as opposed to sitting down and just starting from scratch when they're 15 and there's a lot going on that confuses them and scares them, and now I have to have this conversation with my parents.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Terrifying. And hopefully not just the message that they've heard, but also something that they've seen play out in their own life, right? Mm-hmm. And hope maybe sometime when they were, I feel like thinking about all of my nieces and nephews, I feel like every single one of them has gone through some type of phase where they didn't want to hug anybody. They just wanted Mom or whoever. And so it's not uncommon, right, that kids would, even if it's not a lifelong thing, that they would just go through a phase where they didn't want to hug anybody. And that would have been respected at the time, right? So that as they've grown up, they've seen that, their wishes are respected by the people around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. I think this is a really important book, a great addition to a family's library. There, so many great conversations that can be ongoing. I know that this is not your first book. You also wrote a cute little book about donuts.
I did, yeah. So my first book came out in this past July of 2020, and it's called Dozens of Donuts, and it's about a bear named Luann who is making donuts for herself in preparation for hibernation, but her neighbors keep dropping by, and she kind of ends up serving them all the donuts and not saving any for herself. And since she's a bear, she, disaster ensues because she doesn't react too well to being hungry and tired and ready to settle down for the winter, and she doesn't have any food. So that's been really fun to have that out there in the world and sharing it with kids. And, it's been tough in the pandemic because we haven't been able to have, in-person story times and things like that. But I've done a lot of virtual events, which is really fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Now, if only this bear lived in the greater Boston area, she wouldn't have any trouble because she'd find a Dunkin Donuts like on every other street corner.
Exactly. We have 3 in our town.
Of course.
And an independent donut shop in our town. So we've got plenty of donuts. But she does live out in the woods, so, it's a little harder for her.
It is. It's so weird for me when I travel around the country, if I go someplace and I don't see a Dunkin' Donuts every half a mile, and I'm like, what's wrong with this place? Where am I?
I know. Well, I remember actually traveling down south for the first time, and everyone was talking about Krispy Kreme. I'm like, I've never heard of Krispy Kreme. I'm from Boston. And then I finally had one, and I was like, oh, Krispy Kreme. They're really good.
They are. I remember that when I was traveling down south and saw the hot now sign came on outside the Krispy Kreme, and people on the highway were like dive bombing to get in line to get
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah.
But
hey, you know what else is awesome? Your website. It's really cool. Remind everybody where they can go to find out more about you, to find out more about Don't Hug Doug.
Yes. So my website is www.carriefinison.com. And I also have a newsletter. So if you go to the website, you can see at the bottom of the page, there's a sign up for my newsletter. And I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, just at Carrie Finison, is my handle. So I'm kind of all over the place, but but they can definitely go to my website. Oh, and so if people I don't know how many people who listen to this are in the Boston area, but my local bookstore is Belmont Books. And people can always order a signed copy of the book through Belmont Books if they would like to.
And that is awesome. And so definitely take advantage of that signed book offer from Belmont Books. The other thing is, if the autograph is not that important to you, let's support our local independent bookstores. If they don't have a copy of Don't Hug Doug on their shelves, just simply make a quick phone call before you visit the store. Ask them if they have it. If they don't, ask them if they could order it for you. It's a great way to support that local bookstore. It's also a great way to support authors like Carrie, because it might be the first time that bookstore hears her name and is going to, order the book for you, and then check out Carrie's books and hopefully add them to their collection.
That's so true. And I so appreciate the independent bookstores all around the country, just especially in this pandemic. I mean, it's been so difficult for them. But they've really stepped it up with, curbside pickup and special orders. And really, that's one of the things that has sort of kept me going as a reader, is just being able to, pick up my next book and start reading it and, have something to do at home. So I'd love to support them any way I can.
So important. Yes. And you can get your cleaning supplies from Amazon. Amazon's going to survive if you don't buy Don't Hug Doug from your local independent bookstore.
Right.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Don't Hug Doug, the new book from Carrie Finison. Carrie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. I really appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Melissa Marie Keeping. She is the author of Griffin in the Spring. We're really excited to speak to her. I'm really excited because she is from one of my favorite places in the entire world, Halifax in Nova Scotia in Canada. That's the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Earlier on, you heard us announce that I don't want to say goodbye to Shay Mason is our latest Reading with Your Kids certified great read. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you want to take a minute to check out our Reading with Your Kids certified great read program. And honestly, it's only going to take you a minute. It's not like a lot of those services where you have to read like for 25 or 30 minutes about all the benefits and all the wonderful things this product, this service is going to do for you, only to find out that it costs like an incredibly obnoxious amount of money. And why did you waste all that time? No, literally in a minute you can read about the many benefits from the Reading with Your Kids certified great read program. The cost of the program is right there, right up in front, right when you go log on to the page. It's really been an incredible benefit to so many authors. We've been really pleased that so many authors come back to have their second, their third, their fourth book put in front of our panels to see if they believe that is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars. And when a book is named a certified great read, it has access to some tremendous promotional tools that can really help your book stand out from the crowd of thousands of books that are published every single month. To find out more, go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the authors click here button at the top of the page, scroll on down to certified great read. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Carrie Finison. Please be sure to check out Don't Hug Doug. I also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank our amazing interns, Alexia Brown from Emerson College, Hannah Pat Oboyski from Curry College. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. But most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.